Welcome to Words on Music. I'm Susan Wingrove-Reed. I am the principal keyboard player with the Anchorage Symphony, and I'm delighted to share some information with you about the grand finale to the Anchorage Symphony Orchestra's 80th anniversary season. What a program. We're going to begin with a work by Michael Torke. It's called Bright Blue Music. It's optimistic, and it's in one key, D major, and it never veers from that tonality. A reviewer said about this piece that the work is both absurd and attractive. It's a happy piece. And another reviewer, one of my favorite comments was, "This is a perky, waltz-like figure that gallops through the orchestra like a fugitive from one of Copland's cowboy ballets." Michael Torke has been described as a master orchestrator whose shimmering timbral palette makes him the Ravel of his generation. He has composed in every genre with noteworthy commissions from the New York Philharmonic, Philadelphia, New York City Ballet, Met Opera, and many other international arts groups. He was a finalist for the 2020 Pulitzer Prize in Music. He hasn't got a teaching position, and he spends half his year in a studio apartment in New York City these days, and the other half of the year in Las Vegas. Reflecting on a unique gift that has inspired his compositions from the time he began composing, he said, "Synesthesia is the phenomenon of mixing the senses in some primitive part of the brain. In my case, I experience color when I hear music. I hear it in keys and pitches. If anyone has ever read Oliver Sacks's Musicphilia, I'm in the book as an example." He has written multiple works with color titles, including a piano concerto named Bronze. For the 1985 premiere of Bright Blue Music by the New York Youth Symphony, Torke wrote, "Inspired by Wittgenstein's idea, a philosopher, that meaning is not in words themselves, but in the grammar of words used, I conceived of a parallel in musical terms. Harmonies in themselves do not contain any meaning. Rather, musical meaning results only in the way harmonies are used. The feeling of this work is exuberant. I would leave my outdoor studio, and the trees and the bushes seemed to dance, and the sky seemed a bright blue. The bright blue color contributed towards the key of the piece's title, which has been the color blue for me since I was 5 years old. The lyrical and tonal score makes use of a wide variety of percussion instruments in addition to full brass, woodwinds, and strings." An astute gramophone reviewer compellingly asserts, "In Bright Blue Music, we find Torke reveling in the sheer pleasure of creating music for pure enjoyment, at once immediate and appealing." What an opener to the concert. Jennifer Higdon's Blue Cathedral is a piece the Anchorage Symphony played a couple of years before COVID. And at that time, I was so taken by the colors and the mysticism of the piece. And I'm really excited that we're revisiting it on this special program, which will guide us in musically and in our hearts for Beethoven's Ninth Symphony after the intermission. Blue Cathedral is Higdon's most performed work. She was born in Brooklyn and raised in Tennessee, and she's a Pulitzer Prize-winning composer, American, of course, and in constant demand, and has won 3 Grammys. I played her piano concerto with the Anchorage Symphony a few years past, and immersing myself in her compositional style was a real joy in my life. 200 performances a year occur of Higdon's music. She's one of the most performed living composers. She was self-taught on the flute at the age of 15, and her early influences were the Beatles and bluegrass, Peter, Paul, and Mary, not Mozart and Beethoven. She played flute and percussion in her high school band, public school music, yay, and was also a music major then when she attended college for an undergraduate degree, but realized she was way behind in her classical training, so she had to work extra hard to catch up. She got her master's and a PhD at the University of Pennsylvania, and then postdoctoral work at Curtis. This piece is in one short movement. Blue Cathedral. It's lush, soothing, full of cascades of sound, imaginative scoring, and includes some very delicate percussion instruments, exotic bells, water glasses, a prepared piano at the end of the piece where I will be inserting screws inside between a couple of the higher strings inside the instrument for a very special color at the end. It's thoughtful and spiritual music. The Curtis Institute had commissioned Higdon to write a piece for their 75th anniversary celebration. Her younger brother, Andrew Blue Higdon, had recently died from skin cancer, and the seismic loss deeply influenced her new work. In an interview with the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, she reflected, "It was about deciding if life was going to be about living or about death. I was surprised it turned out so positively." In liner notes for a superb CD called Rainbow Body, which was first issued in 2003 by the Atlanta Symphony, Higdon shared some insights about the evolution of this extraordinary work. Blue, like the sky, where all possibilities soar. Cathedrals, places of thought, growth, spiritual expression, serving as a symbolic doorway into and out of this world. Blue represents all potential and the progression of journeys. Cathedrals represent a place of beginnings, endings, solitude, fellowship, contemplation, knowledge, and growth. As I was writing this piece, I found myself imagining a journey through a glass cathedral in the sky. Because the walls would be transparent, I saw the image of clouds and blueness permeating from outside the church. In my mind's eye, the listener would enter from the back of the sanctuary, floating along the corridor amongst giant crystal pillars, moving in a contemplative stance. The stained glass windows figures would start moving forward, upward at first, and then progressing at a faster pace, rising towards an immense ceiling which would open to the sky. As the journey progressed, the speed of the traveler would increase, rushing forward and up. I wanted to create the sensation of contemplation and quiet peace at the beginning, moving towards a feeling of celebration and ecstatic expansion of the soul, all the while singing along with heavenly music. Curtis Institute of Music is a house of knowledge, a place to reach towards that beautiful expression of the soul which comes through music. I began writing this piece at a unique juncture in my life and found myself pondering the question of what makes a life. The recent loss of my younger brother, Andrew Blue, made me reflect on the amazing journeys that we all make in our lives, crossing paths with so many individuals, singularly and collectively, learning and growing along the way. In tribute to my brother, I feature solos for the clarinet, which he played, and the flute that I play. Because I was the older sibling, it's the flute that appears first, and at the end of the work, the two instruments continue a conversation, but the flute drops out and the clarinet then continues on upward progression journey. This is a story that commemorates living and passing through places of knowledge and of sharing, and of the song called Life. The almost otherworldly atmosphere of floating sounds showcases shimmering, rapturous orchestration. So you should sit back and allow the ravishing tone colors to transport you on a totally unique sonic journey. Beethoven's Ninth Symphony. I'd like to start off with just a few little stories about Beethoven's life, and then let's dive into some perspectives about the score. Beethoven was moody, had a volatile temper, arrogant, often insulting, and also he could be very warm and good-humored. His dad was a musician and an alcoholic, and he wanted his son to become a musician. Piano lessons began when he was so tiny that he had to stand on the piano bench to reach the keys. As a young adult, when he left the city of Bonn, where he was born, and moved to Vienna, he told off a very important patron, a prince, saying, "There will be thousands of princes, but there will ever only be one Beethoven." Vienna. He moved every few months. His landlords were furious with him because he was such a slob. Restaurants, he would forget to pay the bill. He would scribble music on napkins and tablecloths. His favorite dish was scrambled eggs in bread soup and macaroni with Parmesan cheese. And he liked a very strong cup of coffee, 60 beans exactly to a cup. Beethoven, the giant that we think of him as a musician and an artist, was 5'4" tall. The biggest tragedy in his life was his increasing deafness that began around the age of 26, and he was totally deaf before he was 50. Students that I was working with at West High School, helping prepare their choir to join with the concert chorus and chamber singers for this performance, were having a hard time processing that Beethoven was completely deaf when he wrote the Ninth Symphony. How can that happen? Well, he was a genius. Music that he had heard when he could hear, he kept in his head, and he kept the music alive. Nothing else to be said, but amazing, amazing human. The brash composer wrote to a friend, "I despise the world which does not intuitively feel that music is a higher revelation than all wisdom and philosophy." When asked about what inspired him, the completely deaf composer responded in one of his conversation notebooks, writing, "You ask me where I get my ideas. I cannot answer this with certainty. They come unbidden. I may grasp them with my hands in the open air while walking in the woods, in the stillness of the night, at early morning. Stimulated by those moods that poets turn into words, I turn my ideas into tones, which resound, roar, and rage until at last they stand before me in the form of notes." In an essay called "The Rage of Ludwig" about his life, Michael Church noted, "He was a solitary, monosyllabic child who took refuge in a dream world to escape the miseries of the real one." Beethoven's musical powers were scarcely impaired by his deafness. In one sense, it was merely a continuation of the metaphorical deafness into which he'd retreated as a boy. Interesting thought. All his life, he lived in a world where the loudest sounds were those inside his head. Poet Friedrich Schiller and Beethoven belonged to the same tempestuous generation of artists. When they were young, they felt the impact of the French Revolution, which erupted across German and Austrian borders. While Schiller's death occurred barely a week before Napoleon proclaimed himself Emperor of France, Beethoven lived to see the fall of Napoleon and the restoration of order in Austria. He was 22 years old when he first came up with an idea to create a musical setting for Schiller's poem "An die Freude," to joy, written in 1785. The first sketches for Beethoven's newest symphony, his ninth, appeared in 1815, with more extensive sketches after the next couple of years. By 1818, he had the idea of introducing human voices into the symphony. And not surprisingly, this is the innovation that presented him his biggest challenge: how to write music that would justify the use of the human voice in a symphony. In 1823, Beethoven's student Schindler described an incident in which his teacher ran into the room exclaiming, "I've got it, I've got it." And he showed me the sketchbook with the words, "Let us sing the song of the immortal Schiller, Freude," whereupon a solo voice immediately begins the hymn of joy. His inspired solution was to use a vocal soloist, a bass, to introduce the ode, then provide a cohesive transition to the full chorus. In 1824, after a year and a half of intensive hard work, this epic symphony was finally completed. The basic arc of the piece is from chaos and struggle to serenity and jubilation. The mysterious primordial intervals of the open fifth in the introduction hint at the vastness of the structure ahead. Hammer blow octaves open the second movement, a relentless scherzo. The main theme is fugal. Separate instrumental voices are interwoven and punctuated with memorable solo timpani outbursts. Beethoven's focus on rhythm in this movement is dazzling. I love annotator Mark Rohr's observation, "Could any other composer make rhythm swagger like this?" The Adagio, the third movement, is one of the most sublime in the entire symphonic repertoire. This movement incorporates a double variation scheme, incredibly difficult to compose. An ethereal, beauteous melody is played by the first violins and then wore off as more radiant subjects interwove. Musicologist Robert Schaffler described the variations as one of the holiest, purest outpourings of exaltation in the whole domain of mystical music. The lengthy introduction to the extraordinary finale is a musical bridge linking the themes of the first three movements with new material. The main body of this extraordinary movement is an amazing, complex set of variations and a double fugue exploring the straightforward melody assigned to the first stanza of Schiller's Ode to Joy. The main theme is played without singers through the first three variations. But in an electrifying moment, the solo baritone sings Beethoven's own words as a heroic introduction to Schiller's text. "O friends, not these sounds, but let us raise our voices in joyful song." The orchestra heeds the call, then a vocal quartet, chorus, and then the orchestra join forces to explore the Ode to Joy in variations that illuminate the life-affirming text and exalted music. Beethoven's musical roadmap to masterfully maneuver the transition from the three instrumental movements to an unprecedented choral finale was pure genius. The challenging choral writing demands tremendous stamina, energy, and emotional commitment from every singer. The sopranos sing high all the time on the stage to serve the magnificent text. The opening night audience must have been absolutely astonished to witness this remarkable finale. At that opening performance, I wanted to share a story about Beethoven. He conducted, of course, he didn't hear a thing that was happening, and there was a separate conductor standing to the side of him so that the musicians would keep an eye on that conductor to really hold the performance together. There had been errors in writing the parts. The complexity of the score made it extremely challenging to everybody on the stage. There was tumultuous applause, which Beethoven, of course, did not hear. In fact, he stood with his back to the audience and continued to beat time after the music stopped. The contralto at the performance recalled his turning about and the sudden conviction forced on everybody that he had not done so before because he could not hear what was going on, acted like an electric shock on everyone present, and a volcanic explosion of sympathy and admiration followed. I'll conclude with just saying an annotator by the name of Scott Fogelsong really had some great words to share. He said, "This is a symphony that means something beyond the notes. And for many, that meaning is wrapped up in a hope or even a certainty, in a future that will be better, that the human spirit will win out in the end." And with those thoughts and hopes, we will look forward to seeing you in the Atwood Concert Hall for the end of a glorious 80th season for the Anchorage Symphony. Here's to the next 80 years of music in our community and our state.